is going on, traders? Happy Monday. Thank you guys so much for tuning back into the channel. As usual, I'm going to go ahead and let you guys know exactly how my day trading went, so let's get right into today's video. And as you guys can see from the screen, unfortunately today was a red day for me, right? I was down $39.67 on the day, right? That consisted of taking a $35 loss on TQQQ and about a $5 loss on SQQQ, right? And as you guys can see, I had a bunch of orders today, right? So this is the most orders I've ever sent by far in a day. I kind of wanted to try out a slightly new method of trading today, right? Where I was obviously a lot more aggressive in terms of when I would buy in and out, right? So definitely did lead to lots of over trading on the day. As you guys can see, I was trading the whole market day, starting at 6:30, where I was buying into SQQQ. And so pretty much how did my day end up going? Well, what ended up happening was today was a bunch of back and forth, right? So heading into the market open, what I ended up seeing was that the Nasdaq was starting to indicate signs of a sell-off, right? It was trading between the middle and bottom VWAP, and as we approached the market open, right, this thing ended up bouncing, shot up, and then it got rejected by the middle VWAP right around this area, right? And as it started to pull on back, that's when I started to get into SQQQ, right? And so as you guys will notice, that was definitely the move, right? Heading into beginning of market open, the Nasdaq started to sell off, so it would have been in your best interest to get into SQQQ. And so as this thing would sell off, I would continue to add, right, and reduce at more overbought levels, right? But as this thing started to change direction, right, this ended up faking me out, and I gave back some profit, right? But as it got rejected ultimately again and formed this lower high, right? So it didn't go as high as it did before and continued to fall. I got back into SQQQ and was able to make some money back. So by the time this thing ended up falling here, I was up about $60 to $70 on the day, I would say. And then this thing started to bounce, right, and change direction. And as this thing would bounce and try to fall, I would try getting into SQQQ thinking it would continue, right? But this thing would end up changing direction. And so I ended up actually giving back all the profit just by trying to predict where, the reversal was going to be and if we were going to continue to sell off. But that's not what ended up happening, right? We changed direction. We started to use the EMA as a support, right? And form these higher lows and higher highs. So ultimately, I did do a bad job, right, of being too impulsive and getting back into SQQQ whenever the Nasdaq did show any sign of a rejection, right? I would just send it, whether instead of really just playing it smart and going, waiting for an actual trade to set itself up for something, like TQQQ going in my direction. And so ultimately, that's definitely a mistake I made, right? Trying to fall in love with the trade and thinking this thing was bound to sell off because of the green days we've been having, right? But ultimately, this thing did change direction, and I struggled to really go with the change of direction, right? So ultimately, I gave all of the profit that I made on SQQQ back. And what ended up happening? Well, after this big push here, right, it ended up pulling on back, and I was able to make some money on this TQQQ move here. So I went from being up about 60 to 70 on SQQQ, right? Gave it all back, decided on this last push here to get into TQQQ. Right after I locked it in, I was up about $40 on the day. And then what ended up happening, direction changed again, right? So this thing was all over the place today. It was really just trading, sideways, and it wasn't really respecting the middle VWAP all too well, right? So as this thing would sell off, it'd break below it, then back above it, below it, right above it. So it really struggled to find true direction right around this area. And so what ended up happening, this thing ended up finally selling off. And so I actually was losing money as this was happening, right? So as this thing was selling off, I was giving back my profit now on TQQQ, right? So today was pretty much a cycle of making profit, then giving it back once direction changed, right? So once direction changed, I'd made the profit, then it started to change direction again, and I was just constantly giving it back, right? So today was very frustrating in terms of that end. And ultimately, what did we end up seeing? This thing ended up pushing on down, right? Bounced at a previous support that it had earlier on in the day, and it continued to surge, right? As this thing was surging, rather than go with direction, I was trying to predict the bottom and get into SQQQ, right? So I was getting burned all the way up to the point where I was probably down about $140, right? On top of being up $40 on TQQQ, I gave it all back, And as direction changed, right, I kept getting on the wrong side of direction for the day. So as this thing was climbing, I was down about $140 on the day, and I did see potential for the Nasdaq to pull on back, and ultimately that's what ended up happening. Now, why did I see potential for this thing to pull on back? Well, if we take a look at a bigger time frame, right? The only other time the Nasdaq has approached these levels, it did experience some form of rejection, right? So I figured that as we approach these levels, we were either going to break through that resistance and continue to climb, or we could get rejected and pull on back, right? And so I waited for this thing to start to sell off, right? I waited for this thing to sell off, pick up, and then form this lower high here, right? Where it didn't go as high as it did last time. As it started to sell off, I got into SQQQ. I actually locked in my profits here. This thing tried bouncing, right? And then ultimately when I saw this thing get rejected aggressively yet again, right? And it didn't go as high as it did before. That was my signal that this thing could potentially sell off for the remainder of the trading day, and that's what ended up happening. I bought back into SQQQ as this thing broke below EMA, and all I did was ride this thing down, right? So I was riding the selling pressure heading into market close for the rest of the day, and I was able to lock in my trade somewhere around here, right? So I wrote this thing down almost perfectly, and so I was down about $140. Unfortunately, I was riding this thing down with only a 25% position size, but I was still able to make back a lot, and that's how I ultimately ended only down $40 on the day. So I am really grateful, that I made a lot of it back and that this thing did sell off. But heading into the rest of the week, I don't want to put myself in a bad spot like that where I'm just having to work my way out of a big red day. So I'm definitely gonna try not being as impulsive tomorrow and making sure that I really only try to take good setups, right, that are worth it and have enough, risk to reward. That's really favorable in my eyes, right? But that's pretty much everything I wanted to talk about today and how it went for me, right? So definitely disappointing day in the fact that I wasn't really able to end green because of the fact that there were so many changes in direction today, right? And these changes in direction caused me to really overtrade and lose money by going against, where everyone was buying. And so I hope you guys can, take something away from that and are able to learn something. Once direction really starts to change, it's really important to continue to go with direction and not try to predict where the bottom is, right? Because as this thing started to sell off, imagine you were looking for this thing to bounce, right? You were just trying to predict this thing bounce, and say you saw this thing bounce here and you bought back into TQs, only for the true direction to not be in your favor and for you to get wrecked, right? So that's definitely what I need to practice heading into the rest of the week, right? Making sure my trades are worth it, but that I also have direction in my favor. But thank you guys so much for listening, right? As far as where the NASDAQ is going, we are very overbought, right? We have approached these previous levels and we have had some form of sell off, right? So we definitely are a bit more overextended. I do think it could trade sideways, right? For a few more days before it decides to actually pick back up or sell off, right? If this thing starts to consolidate and then we see this thing break resistance and start uptrend even more, I think I'm actually gonna consider the idea of adding back into my swing trades on, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, right? Tesla, a bunch of the top tech stock can see a nice little rally if this thing does break resistance, but other than that, I'm really just going to be paying attention for a possible reversal and price correction on the NASDAQ, right? And so, as far as important meetings, we do have, as you guys can see, right? Tomorrow we do have a PPI report, and for any of you who don't know what a PPI report is, it's pretty much the producer price index, and that just pretty much measures how much um, goods are costing manufacturers, right, to produce in the U.S. And so if we see some news that's definitely bad and not in our favor, then we could potentially see the market dip. But on the other side, this also can act as a positive catalyst that we can see shoot the price of the market up, right? So ultimately, we just have to wait and see what is reported. But for any of you wondering, that is going to be at 5:30 in the morning. So an hour before market open, you'll be able to see, the movement on that. So I'm going to try tuning into that and I will keep you guys updated on what is reported tomorrow. But thank you guys so much for tuning into today's video. If you guys are new, we do appreciate you dropping a like and subscribing. But other than that, if you guys have any questions at all, go ahead and drop a comment and I will be more than happy to make a video on it. But that's pretty much everything. I'm going to be trading and posting a recap tomorrow, so I will see you guys then. Take care.